ਜਸ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਹੋਸਟ ਆਸ਼ਮਿਤਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਫਿਰ ਨਿੱਘਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਕਾਫੀ ਕੁਝ ਵੱਡੀ ਹੈਡਲਾਈਨਸ ਵੱਡੀ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹੋਏ ਹਾਂ। ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਸ ਵੀਕਐਂਡ ਦੀ ਜੋ ਵੱਡੀ ਹੈਡਲਾਈਨ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਮਿਡਲ ਈਸਟ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ ਅੱਜ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੁਝ ਇੱਥੇ ਲੋਕਲ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਡੋਮੈਸਟਿਕ ਡਿਸਕੰਟੈਂਟ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਪਨਪ ਰਿਹਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਖਬਰਾਂ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹਾਂ। ਅਫਕੋਰਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਉਮੀਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਦਾ ਜੋ ਸੈਂਟੀਮੈਂਟ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟ ਰਾਹੀਂ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟ ਵੋਟਸ ਹੋਣ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਦੀ ਕਾਲਜ ਕੈਂਪਸਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ, ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਪੁਸ਼ਬੈਕ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨਸ ਅਤੇ ਪੋਲਿਸੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਜਦੋਂ ਉੱਠਦਾ ਹੈ, ਉਮੀਦ ਤਾਂ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਹੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਪੁਸ਼ਬੈਕ ਨੂੰ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਇਲੈਕਟਿਡ ਅਫੀਸ਼ੀਅਲਸ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨਸ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਨਵਰਟ ਕਰਨ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਨਵਰਟ ਕਰਨ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਪੱਕੇ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਉਸ ਸੈਂਟੀਮੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਲਾਅ ਬਣਾਉਣ। ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਇੱਥੇ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਦੀ ਲੋਕਲ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਟਿਵ ਐਫਰਟ ਬਾਰੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਦੇਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹਾਂ। ਇਹ ਐਫਰਟ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਚਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧਾਈ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਦੋਨੋਂ ਹਾਊਸਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਸਟੇਟ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਅਤੇ ਸਟੇਟ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਸਟੇਟ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸ ਬਿੱਲ, ਇਸ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਸਪਾਂਸਰ ਹਨ ਕੁਈਨਸ ਦੇ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀਮੈਨ ਜ਼ੋਹਰਾਨ ਮਮਦਾਨੀ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੁੜ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਹਨ। ਐਂਡ ਇਸ ਸਟੇਟ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀਮੈਨ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈ, along with a coalition of lawmakers, local New York ਦੇ city council, New York ਦੇ state level ਤੇ and even congressional level federal lawmakers ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਇਹ coalition ਇਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਨਾਨ ਪ੍ਰੋਫਿਟਸ ਨੂੰ, ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਟੈਕਸ ਐਗਜ਼ੈਂਪਟ ਸਟੇਟਸ ਦੇ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਐਂਡ ਉਹ ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ tens of millions of dollars ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਆਰਗੇਨਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਵੱਲ ਸੈਂਡ ਕਰ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਹਨ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲ ਨੂੰ ਗਾਜ਼ਾ ਦੇ ਅਟੈਕ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਹਨ। ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਵੈਪਨਸ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਹਨ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲੀ ਡਿਫੈਂਸ ਫੋਰਸਿਸ ਗਾਜ਼ਾ ਦੇ ਪੈਲਸਟੀਨੀਅਨ ਸਿਵਿਲੀਅਨਸ ਉੱਤੇ ਅਟੈਕ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ। ਪਿਛਲੇ ਸਾਲ ਇਹ ਕੁਝ ਚੈਰੀਟੇਬਲ ਆਰਗੇਨਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਪਾਈਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ $60 million ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲ ਵੱਲ ਸੈਂਡ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਉਹ ਪੈਸਾ ਹੁਣ ਟਰੈਕ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ, ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਵੈਪਨਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਵੈਪਨਸ ਆਫ ਵਾਰ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਡੇਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੈਲਸਟੀਨੀਅਨ ਸਿਵਿਲੀਅਨਸ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ। ਇਹ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਮੰਗਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਫਲੋ ਆਫ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਟੈਕਸਪੇਅਰ ਡਾਲਰਸ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਿਆ ਜਾਏ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਅਟੈਂਡ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀਮੈਨ ਜ਼ੋਹਰਾਨ ਮਮਦਾਨੀ, ਕਾਂਗਰਸਵੂਮਨ Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez ਅਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਸਿਟੀ ਕਾਉਂਸਲ, ਸਟੇਟ ਅਸੈਂਬਲੀ ਅਤੇ ਸਟੇਟ ਸੈਨੇਟ ਲੀਡਰਸ ਅਤੇ ਨਾਨ ਪ੍ਰੋਫਿਟ ਲੀਡਰਸ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਅਤੇ ਸਿਟੀ ਤੋਂ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਸੀਗੇ, ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਮੰਗ ਹੈਗੀ ਇਸ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸੁਣਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ।
So much for coming today and joining us for the relaunch of our legislation titled the Not on Our Dime Act. We are here because the call of this legislation is more urgent than ever. And we can see that in just one of the examples of what inaction has allowed to take place. A charity registered in New York State located on Long Island, the One Israel Fund, has been raising millions of dollars in the last few months to send pistol to rifle converters to Israeli settlers. And all of this is done because New York state law continues to opt for the status quo when given the opportunity to make clear that funding war crimes is not charitable, that allowing for tax breaks for genocide is not in line with what New Yorkers want and what New Yorkers believe. And I'm so thankful to have this coalition here with us today. And it is most important that we begin with the Congresswoman whose office we are in today, who has been a leader on calling for moral clarity and consistency no matter which people we are talking about, no matter what politics. And so it gives me such hope and courage and conviction to have her here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
For sponsoring this very important legislation, as well as to the entire coalition that we see here today of city and state elected officials, that ensuring that we have, that we are making sure that we are upholding our standards and our values as New Yorkers and as Americans with respect for human rights around the globe. I'd also like to thank all of the grassroots and coalition partners from labor to JVP, I believe that we have here, and many others, to ensure that our values are being enacted. What I think is so important about the Assembly members' legislation here is that it is ensuring, and it is a strong effort to make sure that we are consistent with our federal policy as well. Because as we've seen over the last several months, we've seen advancements in ensuring that U.S. federal taxpayer money does not go to funding settler violence in the West Bank. And frankly, this should be part of our broader human rights commitment to ensure that U.S. taxpayer funds do not go to the violations of human rights anywhere in the globe. And that includes in the violations of the rights of Palestinians and the displacement of Palestinians. So, we just saw very recently, just last month, the U.S. Treasury Department imposed sanctions against entities accused of fundraising for extremist settlers found to regularly assault Palestinians in the West Bank. And as we've seen in the past 7 months, it is more important now than ever to hold the Netanyahu government accountable for endorsing and, in fact, supporting some of this settler violence that prevents a lasting peace. This bill will make sure that the ongoing atrocities that we see happening in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as the ongoing enabling of armed militias to terrorize Palestinians in the West Bank, do not benefit from New York State charitable tax exemptions. And the reason this is important is because it's one of the many ways in which U.S. and New York taxpayers and our taxpayer funds are going to violence abroad instead of investing here at home. And that is the core principle that we want, I think, to advance, is that we need to be investing in our healthcare. We need to be investing in peace. We need to be investing and using those charitable exemptions for organizations that are actually bringing about a lasting peace abroad and investment here at home. And I'm so grateful and thankful to Assemblymember Mamdani, as well as the broad coalition here, to ensure that this is not just rhetoric, but that this is something that is real and stated through our actions. So thank you very much.
In the time when Donald Trump was the president of this country, and he made it clear time and again that there was no place for Muslims in our country, one of the most significant memories of pushback was when bodegas across this city went on strike. And so many of our bodega owners are Yemeni merchants who have made this city what it is. And I am so thankful to have Yusuf Mubarrez from Yama Action, the Yemeni American Merchants Association, join us today in this same fight.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Yusuf Mubarrez, president of Yama Action. And as a Yemeni American, I know all too well the consequences of international conflicts and what they can do to our families abroad and here. I mean, every day I see posts collecting helmets and vests and tactical gears to send to a foreign army. Now, imagine as a Yemeni if I was doing the same. Today, there's two committees in Congress calling to get access to financial information of local New York Muslim nonprofits, accusing them of funding terrorism and money laundering, while at the same time, these nonprofits that Assemblymember Mamdani mentioned are openly raising money to send back home for tactical gear and for settler violence. This is why we must support the Not on Our Dime Act to make sure that we are all treated the same and that our money stays here. And coincidentally, I saw a post on TikTok, just a small story, and it was showing, bullet trains and nice buildings and parks in other countries, and it said, these countries are living in 2050. We all know that meme. But the post said, they're not living in 2050. We're just living in America. We don't keep our money here, invest in our own infrastructure. We use it to send back to foreign armies and settler violence. So I appreciate you for inviting me, and the Yemeni Americans will support as much as we can.
Thank you so much. And if we could also just give a round of applause for Assemblywoman Farah Soufran Forrest, for Assemblywoman Marcella Matenas. And I will end with some of the words that Jabari has shared, which is that this coalition continues to grow. This coalition continues to expand, and it mirrors the fight for Palestinian human rights across this country, where every day another elected official, another union, another organization, another person stands up and says, I'm with the kids. I'm with ensuring that we stop killing so many innocent civilians. And it is quite a simple message. And it is one that when you ask a New Yorker on the street, do you believe that organizations funding war crimes, whether they be settler violence or the violence of units of the IDF in Gaza, should receive charitable tax-exempt status? They will tell you no. And our job as politicians is to translate that sentiment into substantive policy. And that is what we are on the path to doing. Because as Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it is done. Many of us here have fought what has been described as impossible fights, and yet we stand here in front of you, emerging on the other side of them. And I know that when it comes to the fight for Palestinian human rights, the fight to finally extend humanity to all people, that is a fight we will win. The only question is when. So thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to everyone for lending your voice. And thank you to all of those who will be joining us soon. I welcome you to this fight. It is never too late to join the one that is struggling for dignity. Thank you so much.
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਜਸ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੁਣ ਜੁੜੇ ਹਨ Congressman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez representing New York at the federal level. Congresswoman, you are part of this coalition to further investigate and possibly put an end to the statewide funding through charities of settler violence in the West Bank. How does this effort, which is being taken at the local level in New York, possibly translate at the federal level? And what can you tell us about any efforts that you may be involved in at the time?
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. One of the things that we have pushed on the federal level has been successfully pushing the Biden administration to sanction individuals that are engaged in settler violence in the West Bank. Now, that's one of the first initial steps. What we are happy to be supporting now on the state level is the actual financial source of support and resources that help fund that settler violence as well. And our hope is that in pushing for that on the state level, we can also apply a little bit more broad and added scrutiny to charities that may be funding violent activity, particularly in the West Bank, but frankly, in the perpetration of human rights around the world.
One follow-up, the representative from YAMA, the Yemeni American Merchants Association, mentioned how there's more than one committee taking place in DC right now to investigate potential support, financial support of terrorist arms and activities through American dollars. Is there any pushback for that kind of activity from your end or your cohorts?
Yes, absolutely. We vigorously oppose it. In fact, these two attempts to investigate primarily Arab and Middle Eastern based organizations, but frankly also Jewish organizations standing in solidarity with Palestinians. This is an effort that is primarily being pushed by Republicans. It is the Republican chair of oversight, as well as I believe one of the Republican chairs on I believe education and labor. And so we want to make sure that we vigorously oppose that. I do vigorously oppose it, and also it is a Republican-only effort as of now, which is significant because once it is bipartisan, it could potentially generate greater momentum.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. ਫਿਰ ਇਸ ਕੋਲਿਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲੀਡ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹਨ Assemblyman Zoran Mamdani. Assemblyman, once again, this is a local effort to put a pause on the New York State tax dollars going towards settler violence in the Middle East, in specifically the West Bank. Speaking to the South Asians, particularly that come from Queens and the most diverse parts of New York City, how can they be more cognizant of where their charitable donations are going? And are there any efforts that they can engage in to make sure that their money, their hard-earned money, does not support violence across oceans?
You know, absolutely. First and foremost, this fight for Palestinian human rights is a fight that I hear so often across the South Asian community in our borough of Queens, where so many members have come up to me asking, how can we ensure that our voice is being heard? We have members of our community, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Nepali, from all across the South Asian diaspora, who give money to charities that they rightfully see as helping the needy. When New York State allows charities such as the ones we're talking about today to use that same tax-exempt status to send money to fund war crimes, whether it be in the West Bank or in Gaza, it diminishes what we are telling the rest of our community that their money can do. It cheapens their charitable donation because it equates it to the violation of international law in that they're all enjoying the same tax-exempt status. What we need to do is uphold the spirit of charitable law, which is a definition of charitable that doesn't include funding war crimes. And so for South Asians across Queens, anywhere in New York State, who are concerned about this, the first thing that they should and can do is reach out to their state legislators. Because as much as these issues may seem like issues for Washington, D.C. or foreign policy, it's state law that decides what is a charitable purpose and what charities get to enjoy that exempt status. And so what we are saying right now is that New York state law needs to change so that it makes explicit that if you are an organization sending money to fund war crimes, whether it be in West Bank or Gaza, you should no longer be considered a charity and enjoy the tax-exempt status of that.
Assemblyman, once again, this is a local-led effort, as we saw with the very diverse coalition that you've put together here. Part of the coalition is also Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who represents part of New York City at the federal level. What is your hope that this kind of effort will go beyond just the borders of New York City, New York State, especially when we've seen that local efforts at the grassroots level, for example, the student protests, have had somewhat of a push and an impact, potentially pushing President Biden and executive policy to take a step back from blindly supporting these kind of actions? What is your hope that this kind of local effort may inspire other local efforts across the country?
I think that it is something very possible because I've already heard from legislators in different states of this country asking how can they introduce similar legislation? Because it's not a New York specific concern to ensure that your charities are not funding war crimes. It is an American concern. And what we've seen in poll after poll of Americans across this country is they want to see a permanent and immediate ceasefire. And that desire is born out of a desire for a just and lasting peace. And you cannot get there if you allow tax-exempt status to funnel tens of millions of dollars to ensure that injustice continues on a daily basis. So I'm hopeful that we see efforts like this across the country. However, I would say that New York is unique in the amount of money we're talking about, the more than $60 million being sent every year. It makes New York a leader for all the wrong reasons in this country.
Thank you so much for your time and for the work you're putting in this regard.
Thank you so much.
once again ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਵੇਖਿਆ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਲੋਕਲ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਿਟੀ ਸਟੇਟ ਅਤੇ ਕੰਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਲੀਡਰਸ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਐਫਰਟ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ ਉਸ ਪੁਸ਼ਬੈਕ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਟਿਵ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਪੱਕੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਫਲੋਰ ਤੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ ਕਿ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ ਮੰਗ ਰਹੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀਜ਼ ਡਾਈਵੈਸਟ ਕਰਨ ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲ ਤੋਂ ਕਿ ਉਹੀ ਮੰਗ ਨਾਨ ਪ੍ਰੋਫਿਟ ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਲਈ ਹੀ ਰੱਖੀ ਜਾਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਨਾਨ ਪ੍ਰੋਫਿਟ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਟੈਕਸ US ਟੈਕਸਪੇਅਰ ਡਾਲਰਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਲੋਕੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਚੈਰਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਪੈਸੇ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੈਲਪ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਪੈਸੇ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਉਹ ਪੈਸਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨ ਲਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਨਾ ਪਤਾ ਹੋਏ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਚੈਰੀਟੇਬਲ ਡੋਨੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਜਾ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਹਨ ਬਟ ਇਹ ਲਾਅ ਮੇਕਰਸ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਪਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਵੀ ਦੱਸ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਸਾਲ ਹੀ $60 million ਇਨ ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਫਨਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲੀ ਡਿਫੈਂਸ ਫੋਰਸਿਸ ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਵੈਪਨਸ ਵੱਲ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਵੈਪਨਸ ਆਫ ਵਾਰ ਹਨ ਉਹ ਵੈਪਨਸ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ ਪੈਲਸਟੀਨੀਅਨ ਸਿਵਿਲੀਅਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨ ਲਈ ਗਾਜ਼ਾ ਦੀ ਇਸ ਵਾਰ ਐਫਰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਕੀਤੇ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ ਐਂਡ ਵਾਂਸ ਅਗੇਨ ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਟੂ ਸੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਡਿਸਕਲੇਮਰ ਰੱਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜ਼ਾਹਿਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਉਨ ਲਾਅ ਮੇਕਰਸ ਉਨ ਕੋalition ਲੀਡਰਸ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਕਾਨਫਰੰਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਟੂ ਸੇ ਕਿ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਜੂਇਸ਼ ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਪਾਵਰਫੁਲ ਇੰਪੈਕਟਫੁਲ ਪੋਜ਼ਿਟਿਵ ਚੇਂਜ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਹਨ ਬਟ ਕੁਝ ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਜੋ ਕਿ US ਟੈਕਸਪੇਅਰ ਡਾਲਰਸ ਜੋ ਲੋਕੀ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡੋਨੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਇਨ ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਇਨ ਚੈਰਿਟੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਡੋਨੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਪੈਸਾ USA ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਪੈਸਾ ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲ ਦੀ ਵੈਪਨਸ ਆਫ ਵਾਰ ਐਫਰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਇਹ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਮੰਗ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੀ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਚਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧਾਇਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਐਫਰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਕੁਝ ਅਪਡੇਟਸ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਵਾਂਗੇ ਐਂਡ ਆਫ ਕੋਰਸ ਟੂ ਕਲੋਜ਼ ਆਊਟ ਦ ਸੈਗਮੈਂਟ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਦਿਓ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਕੁਐਸਚਨਸ ਕਮੈਂਟਸ ਕੰਸਰਨਸ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਲਿਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ info@jusbroadcasting.com ashmita@jusbroadcasting.com have a good rest of your evening ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ